5:47 a.m. Asheville, North Carolina. A gravel lane off Pisgah Highway, still dark except for the amber glow of a single fluorescent tube above a corrugated metal shed. The first agent through the door smelled beeswax and raw honey. The second was already moving left, toward the man in the corner, gray flannel shirt, mud-caked rubber boots, a wooden hive frame in both hands. He didn't run, he didn't reach for anything. He set the frame down on the workbench, carefully, the way a man does when he doesn't want to disturb the bees. 12 U.S. Marshals, 1 fugitive, 31 months of silence, ended in 40 seconds. The man's legal name, on the apiary permit, the county extension membership, the Blue Ridge Beekeeping Cooperative roster, was Emilio Varga, a transplant from western Pennsylvania who'd moved to Henderson County in the summer of 2023 and built something quiet: 400 hives, 3 farmers market stalls, a reputation for selling the best sourwood honey in the Pisgah foothills. His real name was Rodrigo Salcedo Ibarra. The sealed federal indictment waiting for him in the Southern District of Florida described a man who had moved $1.4 billion in cartel drug proceeds through 62 shell companies incorporated in Miami-Dade County, and then vanished. What they called Operation Hollowcomb had started with a dental x-ray. Not a tip, not an informant, not a wire intercept. A decade-old radiograph pulled from an archived orthodontic file in Medellin, Colombia, cross-referenced against a digital photograph posted on a county agricultural cooperative's public website. That image, a man in a full beekeeper suit, veil down, gloves on, would have meant nothing to anyone, except to one U.S. Marshals cold case analyst in Washington, D.C., who noticed that the jawline didn't match the man's stated biography. That one observation triggered everything that followed. This is the story of how a money laundering coordinator for one of Colombia's most sophisticated financial criminal networks spent 31 months hiding inside the most unlikely cover imaginable, and how the system found him anyway. Rodrigo Salcedo Ibarra was not, by any measurable definition, a street criminal. No record of violence, no drug convictions, no weapons charges. Court documents filed in the Southern District of Florida, unsealed after his arrest, described him as a financial coordinator, a man who moved money, not product. His role within the network was architectural. He built the structures through which cartel cash became legitimate revenue streams. He designed the corporate shells. He drafted the invoices. He maintained the accounting fiction that kept 62 Miami companies appearing solvent, active, and clean. Between April 2019 and November 2022, those 62 companies collectively processed $1.4 billion in funds prosecutors say originated from cocaine trafficking across multiple South American supply chains. The money entered the shell structure as consulting fees, import-export commissions, logistics contracts, and real estate management retainers. It exited as clean wire transfers into accounts in Uruguay, Panama, the United Arab Emirates, and Spain. The operation was sophisticated enough that it survived 3 separate federal financial reviews without triggering a suspicious activity report. That wasn't luck. That was construction. Salcedo Ibarra had engineered the layering specifically to stay beneath the thresholds that trigger automated banking flags. Each transaction was calibrated. Each invoice was plausible. Each company had a real registered agent, a real address, a real phone number that rang somewhere. The investigation that eventually produced the sealed indictment didn't start with Salcedo Ibarra at all. It started with a parallel probe run jointly by the IRS Criminal Investigation Division and FinCEN, the Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, targeting what analysts called Tier 2 laundering infrastructure in South Florida. The target wasn't any single individual. It was a pattern, a cluster of Miami-Dade corporate entities that appeared disconnected on paper but shared invisible structural features. The same registered agent firm, the same accounting software fingerprint, the same pattern of quarterly reporting cycles. Field analyst Petra Watovich, assigned to the FinCEN liaison desk in Miami, spent 4 months mapping the corporate graph. By the time her analysis was complete, she had identified 62 entities linked by what she described in her report as structural homology. They were built using the same blueprint, the same sequence of steps, the same legal filing patterns. The probability that 62 separate companies, nominally unrelated, would share that level of structural similarity by coincidence was, according to the forensic accountants who reviewed Wojtowicz's work, effectively zero. The architect of that blueprint was Salcedo Ibarra. It took another 6 months of financial forensics to identify him. When the sealed indictment was filed in November 2022, investigators believed he was still in Miami. He wasn't. He had left the country 17 days before the indictment was filed, suggesting, though prosecutors couldn't prove it at the time, that he had been tipped off. How he received that information remains an active area of inquiry. What the court file does confirm, by the time U.S. Marshals activated a fugitive warrant and began the manhunt, Salcedo Ibarra had already cleared customs in Bogotá, crossed into Ecuador through a land border, and, according to passport records obtained through Interpol channels, entered the United States again 11 weeks later under the name Emilio Varga, using fraudulent identity credentials sophisticated enough to pass initial inspection at a U.S. entry point. The question that haunted the case for the next 2 years: where had he gone inside the United States? And who had helped him build the Varga identity? Going through the Fugitive Task Force's case logs, one detail kept nagging. For 31 months, there were no confirmed sightings, no financial pings, no communications intercepts, no informant reports. For a man who had spent years inside the financial architecture of a sophisticated cartel network, a man who by definition knew people, owed favors, had contacts across 3 continents, the silence was almost too complete. That silence was itself a data point. Salcedo Ibarra had made a deliberate decision to disappear not just from law enforcement, but from his own network. He wanted no contact, no lifeline, no trail. The cover he built wasn't designed to survive scrutiny, it was designed to never attract it. Blue Ridge Wildflower Apiaries was registered as a sole proprietorship in Henderson County, North Carolina, in August 2023. The registration paperwork listed Emilio Varga as the owner-operator. The business address, a rural property off Pisgah Highway, 9 miles south of Brevard. The stated purpose, production and retail sale of varietal raw honey. Within 18 months of registration, the apiary had grown to 400 hives spread across 3 leased parcels in the Pisgah foothills. Salcedo Ibarra, operating as Varga, had secured a vendor permit at the Asheville City Market, a stall at the Mills River Farmers Market, and a seasonal spot at the Black Mountain Seasonal Market. He attended beekeeping cooperative meetings. He filed his state business taxes on time. He purchased his equipment, hive boxes, extractors, jars, wax, through legitimate agricultural supply channels, paying in cash. He did not maintain a bank account under the Varga name. He did not hold a driver's license under that name. He paid his property lease in cash, quarterly, through a property management company that accepted cash payments from agricultural tenants, a practice that was unusual, but not illegal, and critically, not flagged. The break came from a direction no one on the Fugitive Task Force had anticipated. In March 2026, a U.S. Marshals cold case reviewer named Task Force Officer Dominique Ferrier was conducting a routine quarterly review of long-outstanding fugitive warrants. Salcedo Ibarra's case had been flagged for reactivation after 30 months of inactivity, standard protocol for high-value fugitives who had exceeded the 2-year threshold without a confirmed sighting. Ferrier's review process involved running the fugitive's biometric data, fingerprints, dental records, facial measurements, against newly indexed public digital sources. That process had been expanded in 2024 to include agricultural and cooperative membership databases maintained by state extension offices across the Southeast. The expansion was part of a broader pilot program testing whether fugitives were exploiting rural business registrations as cover identities. Salcedo Ibarra's dental records, a full radiograph series captured during a 2013 orthodontic consultation in Medellin, were in the system. The Medellin records had been obtained through an Interpol mutual legal assistance request filed in 2023 and had been sitting in the fugitive file without a match for over 2 years. The facial recognition scan against the Henderson County Agricultural Cooperative's public member photo directory returned a partial match. The match score, 71%, was below the threshold for an automatic alert. Ferrier reviewed it manually. The photograph showed a man in a full beekeeper's suit, veil, gloves, jacket. Only the lower half of the face was visible. Most reviewers would have passed it. Ferrier requested the dental overlay comparison instead. The radiographic comparison between Salcedo Ibarra's 2013 Medellin records and a dental scan on file for Emilio Varga, obtained through a North Carolina State Health Records query tied to a 2024 Agricultural Cooperative Health Fair, returned a match above threshold. 94.7% probability. What's most surprising about this case isn't the dental match, it's that it almost didn't happen. The health fair record was filed under a slightly different spelling of the Varga surname. A clerical error during digitization had transposed two characters in the last name. Farrier's search algorithm was configured to allow a two-character variance in surname matching. Without that setting, the record wouldn't have appeared in the results at all. A two-character typo, 31 months of freedom, ended by a data entry error. Farrier escalated immediately. The U.S. Marshals Carolinas Regional Fugitive Task Force was activated within 48 hours. A surveillance package was requested and approved through the Western District of North Carolina, authorizing static observation of the Pisgah Highway property. The surveillance team, 6 marshals and 2 task force officers from the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office, established 3 fixed observation points across the foothills within 4 days of authorization. They used agricultural cover, a county road maintenance truck, a surveying crew vehicle, and a utility contractor van. None were unusual on roads that service rural mountain properties. Over the next 14 days, the surveillance team documented Salcedo Ibarra's full operational pattern. He woke between 4:30 and 5 a.m. every day except Sunday. He worked the hives in the morning, processing honey in the shed through early afternoon. On Tuesday and Thursday, he drove a white 2021 Ford Transit, registered to a North Carolina LLC in the Varga name, to supply pickup points near Brevard. On Saturday mornings, he loaded the van with case jars and drove to the Asheville City Market, arriving before 7 a.m. for setup. No visitors. No outgoing calls were observed on any device detectable through perimeter monitoring. He paid for his weekly supply run at a Brevard farm supply store in cash. He spoke to market customers in fluent English, with what several people who later spoke with investigators described as a mild European accent, consistent with his cover identity as a Pennsylvania transplant of Hungarian descent. The man had built a life that required almost no digital footprint to sustain. Investigators noted that was not an accident. Here's the part that doesn't make sense on the surface. A man with access to $1.4 billion in laundered cartel proceeds was living in a rural North Carolina farmhouse, selling honey at a farmer's market for $22 a jar. Forensic accountants who later reviewed the Varga business records found that Blue Ridge wildflower apiaries had generated approximately $87,000 in gross revenue over its 18-month operating history. That was it. No hidden wire transfers. No offshore accounts in the Varga name. No cryptocurrency wallets linked to the identity. This wasn't supposed to work. A man of Salcedo Ibarra's profile, with his connections, with his knowledge of financial architecture, choosing to go fully dark, fully cash, fully rural. The Financial Intelligence Network should have picked up a trace somewhere. In practice, there was nothing to find. He had stopped being a financial criminal and started being a beekeeper. The cover wasn't a disguise. It had become the reality. That raised a question the task force couldn't fully answer during the surveillance window. Where was the money? The $1.4 billion he had moved through the Shell network, his cut, his reserves, his emergency fund, had to exist somewhere. Forensic accountants working the Southern District of Florida case had identified approximately $11 million in proceeds they believed had been set aside for Salcedo Ibarra's personal use. None of that money had ever surfaced in any financial system under any identity connected to him. Here's what most coverage of this case skips over. The fact that $11 million belonging to a documented money launderer has been sitting somewhere in the global financial system for 31 months without detection is not a testament to criminal tradecraft. It is a failure of financial intelligence infrastructure. The Shell network Salcedo Ibarra built was dismantled. The man who built it is in custody. The money that paid him has not been found. Subscribe to BUREAUVAULT so you don't miss the follow-up when prosecutors reveal what they've recovered, or what they haven't. The arrest operation was authorized for the pre-dawn window of May 14, 2026. Task Force Commander Special Agent Britta Halverson selected 5:45 a.m., early enough that Salcedo Ibarra would be inside the processing shed beginning his morning work, late enough that ambient darkness would not create observation problems for the perimeter teams. The property had one access lane. 2 marshals' vehicles blocked it from the north. 2 more staged near the shed's rear service door. The remaining 8 formed the primary entry element. There were no other structures within 400 meters. The nearest residential property was occupied by a retired couple who had spoken to Salcedo Ibarra at the Mills River Market and described him to investigators as extremely polite and very knowledgeable about bees. The entry was quiet. The shed door was unlocked. Salcedo Ibarra had been working since before 5 a.m. The fluorescent light above the door was on. Halverson made entry first, followed by Special Agent Cormac Desai and 4 supporting marshals. The other 6 held perimeter positions. Salcedo Ibarra was standing at the extraction workbench when they entered. He was uncapping honeycomb frames, a job that requires attention and a specific motion. He heard the door and turned. He saw the body armor. He saw the gold badge. He set down the uncapping knife, deliberately, blade side away from his body, on the rubber mat at the left edge of the bench. He placed both hands flat on the workbench surface. He did not speak. Desai moved in with restraints. Salcedo Ibarra was placed in handcuffs without resistance, without incident, without a single word spoken by either party, until Halverson read the warrant aloud in the shed, standing next to stacked wooden hive frames and 400 pounds of jarred honey. A forensic photographer documented the cuffs against the honey-stained workbench. That image, honey jars, hive frames, a man in handcuffs wearing rubber boots, became the cover photograph for the initial press release issued by the U.S. Marshals Service Southern District of Florida office 17 hours later. The shed was processed as a secondary crime scene. Agents recovered 2 burner phones, both encrypted, both battery depleted. A false bottom compartment built into the base of a supply cabinet contained 3 sets of identity documents, none in the Varga name, none in the Salcedo Ibarra name. All 3 appeared to be clean identities that had never been used. Task Force Officer Ferrier, reviewing the recovered documents later, noted that all 3 identities had been constructed using the same structural methodology as the Varga identity. Whoever had built them, and Salcedo Ibarra has declined to comment on this, knew exactly what they were doing. One detail that stuck when reviewing the case file: the burner phones. Both were fully discharged when recovered. Salcedo Ibarra had been maintaining them in that state deliberately. A device with a dead battery cannot ping a cell tower, cannot be located by any passive monitoring system. He had been keeping them charged just enough to use occasionally, then running them down. That's not casual operational security. That's disciplined, sustained, practiced. The man had been planning for 31 months for the possibility of exactly what happened on May 14, 2026. What do you think? Is 31 months in a rural mountain farmhouse justice delayed? Or did the dental record system work exactly as it was supposed to? Operation Hollowcomb produced a single arrest: the man in the shed. No simultaneous raids, no coordinated network takedown. Because by the time the warrant was executed, the network Salcedo Ibarra had served was, for practical purposes, already dismantled through the original Southern District of Florida prosecution. 15 other defendants in that case had already entered pleas or been convicted at trial. Salcedo Ibarra was the last open fugitive. He was transported from Asheville to the Western District of North Carolina courthouse for initial appearance, then transferred to federal custody in Miami for arraignment on the original indictment. He entered a not guilty plea. Pre-trial detention was ordered. His public defender filed a motion challenging the dental record comparison methodology, arguing the health fair record had been obtained without proper notice to the subject, a motion that legal observers described as a procedural long shot. The apiary, the 400 hives, the processing equipment, the jarred inventory, the 3 farmers market vendor permits, was placed in the custody of the Henderson County Agricultural Extension Office pending disposition of the property. A cooperative of local beekeepers submitted a formal request to assume management of the hives to prevent colony collapse during the legal proceedings. That request was granted on a provisional basis by the district court. The 3 unused identity documents recovered from the false bottom compartment remain under analysis. Investigators have not publicly identified the source of those documents or the names they carry. The $11 million in proceeds believed to have been set aside for Salcedo Ibarra's personal use remains unrecovered. The individual or individuals who provided the tip that allowed Salcedo Ibarra to leave Miami 17 days before the original indictment was filed have not been identified or charged. The network is dismantled. The man who built its architecture is in custody. The money he was paid to build it has not been found. Comment yes or no. Do you think the unrecovered $11 million will surface before his trial concludes? Blue Ridge Wildflower Apiaries still has a vendor listing on the Asheville City Market website. As of this recording, no one has updated it. The listing shows the spring honey varieties, the prices, the market hours. It still reads, Proprietor Emilio Varga. Emilio Varga doesn't exist. He never did. The sourwood honey was real. The bees were real. 31 months of a fabricated life, maintained with the same precision that once moved $1.4 billion across 62 companies and 3 continents. And at the end of it, a dental x-ray, a 2-character typo in a health fair database, and 12 marshals standing in a honey shed at dawn. The demand that generates $1.4 billion in cartel proceeds doesn't disappear when one architect gets caught. The next shell structure is already being built somewhere. The next Emilio Varga is already learning his cover story. Operation Hollowcomb is closed. The system that required it is not.